Today we're looking at the V-DEM report 2024, which stated that India is the world's largest electoral autocracy. Is this the end? Is the world's largest democracy becoming autocratic? We're seeking these answers by analyzing this report right now. Disclaimer: the aim of this video is not to endorse any political views or malign any individual or institution. It is simply a representation of the facts published by the University of Gothenburg in the V-DEM report of 2024. What is V-DEM? V-DEM stands for Varieties of Democracy. It's the world's largest global data set on democracy with 31 million data points on 202 countries. It measures nearly 600 different attributes of democracy. This is the key paragraph in the report, which completely changed the global perception on democracy in India. What was known as the most successful democracy or the world's largest democracy, this entire image has been tarnished by the report. But my intention is not to say that the report is fake. I'm presenting the facts as accurately as possible to prove how India has been autocratizing in the past few years. In the report, it clearly says, and I quote, "India's process of autocratization begins in earnest from 2008 and characteristically proceeded in the incremental, slow-moving fashion of the third wave. Over the years, India's autocratization process has been well documented, including gradual but substantial deterioration of freedom of expression, compromising independence of the media, crackdowns on social media, harassment of journalists critical of the government, as well as attacks on civil society and intimidation of the opposition. The ruling anti-pluralist Hindu nationalist BJP has, for example, used laws on sedition, defamation, and counter-terrorism to silence critics. The BJP government has undermined the constitution's commitment to secularism by amending the UAPA in 2019. The government also continues to suppress the freedom of religion rights. Intimidation of political opponents and people protesting government policies, as well as silencing of dissent in academia, are now prevalent. India has dropped down to electoral autocracy in 2018 and remains in this category by the end of 2023. This report is highly significant and important, especially in the year 2024, because this is the election year in several significant countries, and India's election is the world's largest election. As you can see in figure 1 here, the process of regimes and regime change is expressed. As they move towards the blue, it shows increase in democratization, which means there's more freedom, civil liberties, less constraints on the judiciary and legislative constraints, and equality before law. Whereas as we're moving towards the red side, towards autocracy, there's a decline in electoral freedom, clean elections, freedom of expression, freedom of association, and fundamental democratic rights. So India right now is in electoral autocracy, which means that multi-party elections exist, but there's insufficient fundamental requisites such as freedom of expression, freedom of association, and clean elections. We're not even in the gray zone anymore. We went from being in the complete blue from liberal democracy all the way to electoral autocracy, which means that our elections are merely figureheads. They have no democratic meaning, and they don't translate to true democracy or rights or liberties for the citizens. The key indicators of this democracy and the difference between autocratization and democratization, there's nearly 600, but I've limited down to these: freedom of expression, clean elections, freedom of association, deliberation, which means how the opposition is allowed to discuss, or whether there's freedom of people to discuss, oppose the government, or speak critically about the government. We also have extent of public participation, which can be assessed by voter turnout and civil society organizations, and in general, the public's intent and perception of the government. And lastly, which is perhaps the most important, is the election management body autonomy, EMB autonomy, which is highly indicative of either an independent democracy or a controlled executive controlled democracy. So figure 7 here shows democratic aspects improving or declining in 2020 2003 and 2013. So we have the deliberative component, which is the circle, the egalitarian component, which is the square, the electoral democracy, which is the diamond, the liberal component, which is the triangle, and the inverted triangle, which is the participatory component. So as you can see, the number of countries declining was around maximum of 16 in most of the components. But if we look at 2023, nearly 36 countries are declining in terms of freedom of speech. 24 countries nearly are declining in terms of clean elections. And the number of countries improving is going down to nearly zero in terms of suffrage, equal protection, direct vote, regional elections, CSO participation, equal protection, equal access, equal distribution. Whereas in 2013, the clean elections, the number of countries improving was 24. The countries improving in terms of local elections was nearly 22. So it's a clear decline in democracy, not only in India, but all across the world. These are 36 countries whose quality and enforcement of freedom of speech is declining. In this list of electoral autocracies, we can see whether their performance is decreasing or increasing compared to 2023. India is over here, and if we look at the zoom in here, India is the last in this picture, and we can see that from 2013, it's actually been declining from an electoral autocracy. So the performance is degrading. Even in terms of the Liberal Democracy Index or the Press Freedom Index, India's performance is consistently declining, which is a bad sign and a warning signal for the future. Figure 14, if you look at the top 10 standalone autocratizers in 2023, India is among the top. Its performance in the Liberal Democracy Index is slightly below 0.6. This is in 2007, by the way. If you look all the way down at the red triangle, India is 2023 is approximately 0.275, which means that in just a span of around 14 years or 2 terms, approximately about 3 terms of the government, India has declined by nearly 0.3 points in the Liberal Democracy Index. And if we also look at the rank order by magnitude of change, which means the absolute change in the value on the LDI, or the Liberal Democracy Index, which is a similar index also published by the same University of Gothenburg on democracy and the state of liberty indicators in the countries across the world. We can see that India is the 4th highest magnitude of change with minus 0.295 on the Liberal Democracy Index. We also have a small box on BRICS Plus as a club of autocracies. We know that in the past few months there has been an increase in the membership of BRICS with new countries such as Egypt, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. But increasingly this is becoming a club of autocracies because we already know China and Russia are electoral autocracies, and India has been descending quickly, and Iran and Saudi Arabia are known as some of the world's worst human rights abusers in the world, and the UAE also ranks on the bottom. So the intent of this box is to show that many of these international groupings, which were once known as heralding democracy or fostering democracy and global peace, stability, and diplomacy, are now becoming groupings of autocracies coming together. And this can have wider implications for the entire third world countries as well, who depend on these international groupings for financial aid, development, and support. And lastly, I'd like to discuss the election management body autonomy in depth, which is currently the greatest threat to Indian democracy. There's a systematic decline in the autonomy of the Election Commission. First, it was the unilateral appointment of the election commissioners without proper consultation of the leader of opposition from the Lok Sabha and the Chief Justice. 2 of the election commissioners in the 3-body panel resigned before the election year of 2024, and 2 new retired officers were appointed without properly consulting the leader of opposition from the Lok Sabha or the Chief Justice, which is alarming because the Supreme Court in 2023 ruled that the constitution makers did not want executive control over the appointment of the election commissioner. They wanted a collective decision making in order to uphold the checks and balances between the 3 organs and ensure that every organ has a proper say and just to prevent any biased appointment. But this was already flouted in 2024. Secondly, the inability or unwillingness of the Election Commission to conduct stable, peaceful elections in a timely manner. We've all seen several reports in our respective states and constituencies of election violence in the polling booths, or malfunctioning, or some sort of technical glitches. And lastly, which is probably the most alarming issue, is the current row happening between the Election Commission and the Supreme Court. With the Election Commission is refusing to produce data on the voter turnout, and additionally, they're not producing absolute data, they're only producing percentage data, which is basically irrelevant and not even useful, because percentages can have wider implications, whereas absolute numbers can give us an exact count of the total electorate or the number of eligible voters, the number of people that showed up to vote, and then from that we can calculate the percentage of voter turnout, which is essentially the number of people that came to vote divided by the total electorate population times 100. But by only producing the percentage by the Election Commission, we don't know how many voters there are, how many people actually turned out. We don't have any absolute numbers, which can be maligned and used in unfair ways. As you can see in these headlines here from various newspapers, there's the Election Commission reports to the Supreme Court in this case that there's no legal mandate to make final turnout data of all booths public. How is this constitutional when the Right to Information Act provides that any government, any public individual has the right to demand information from the public? And in the past, in 2014 and 2019, and 2009 in fact, the Election Commission every year provides the total electorate, as you can see on the screen here, 83.41 crore in 2014, total votes polled, and the total voter turnout percentage, women turnout and male turnout, and the gender gap. Such comprehensive systematic data in every election, but this year they failed to produce the absolute numbers, and they're questioning the Supreme Court and asking that there's no legal mandate to make the turnout data available to the public. And also, the Congress government questioned the delay in the release of voter turnout data. There's a 1.7 crore vote difference. The first phase of election was conducted on April 19th, and the reported turnout percentage by the Election Commission was around 60%. But, as you can see this headline here, the underlined part, the data published 11 days later on April 30th in a press release showed a sharp increase by about 5 to 6% as compared to the initial percentage announced by the EC at 7 p.m. on the day of polling on April 19th. So from 60% to 66.14%. This is a definite threat to democracy, because 6% of votes, it may seem like a meager percent, but in terms of India's large population, 6% could be thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even lakhs of votes, which can completely swing the election and change the outcome at the end. So these percentage changes, the inability to produce absolute figures, the Election Commission questioning the Supreme Court on why they should produce final turnout data when they've done it every single election, these are all signs of turbulent times in India, of decline in democracy in India. Something big is happening in this country, and we have to realize it in these last few phases of the election and ensure that we vote not just for a party or not for a candidate or not for a single individual, but to make sure that we vote to save democracy in this country. In the 1977 election, after the emergency declared by Indira Gandhi, that election was known as the election to save democracy because of the various fundamental right violations that occurred during the democracy. I declare this is a similar situation. There are various fundamental rights, constitutional provisions, and prerogatives being violated by the executive and the ruling party itself. To save democracy in this country, we have to vote accordingly. My final conclusion is, as I mentioned earlier, democracy is rapidly declining in India. What once was the largest, most prosperous democracy is delineating on the path towards autocracy. I hope you gained a wider understanding of how the V-DEM democracy report, it's not a malignment of facts, it's not inaccurate representation, it's not a foreign attempt to degrade India. All of these are signs that India's democracy is degrading. But it's not the end yet. The choice is up to you. Thank you.